I want to welcome everybody today. It's our second event of 2021. It's our 20th anniversary year of Stonebridge Book Club. We'll start with the Secretary's report, which Elaine posted on the door. And so I'd just like a motion that it's going to be passed as read. Thank you, Robin and Eileen, that's taken care of. The Treasurer's report, Kathy Tyberski's here, but I'll give the balance. We have $2,007.93. I don't know how we got the 93 cents, but that's what we have. So thank you, Kathy, for keeping track of all that. And Carol Henry's here, our communications and membership person. Oh, there you are, Carol. Do you want to announce how many members we have? I have it here. Okay. We have 177 paid members. Is that still correct? 3 more today? Okay. Well, we have at least 177 paid members, which is wonderful. And do we know how many people we have here today? Okay, just tell me, because I just want to say it's probably 30. And last year we had 125 people in this room. Can you believe that? So what a difference, right? But next year we will. We'll have 125 here next year. Our charities, unfortunately, of course, again, due to COVID, they have not been able to visit the sites, but they have spoken to all the people in charge, and you know, they're still in great need, especially this year. I don't know if everybody knows our 3 charities. It's Naples Park Elementary School, and I have a sign outside where they thanked us for all of our help in the past. And Literacy Volunteers of Collier County, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Grace Place. They are our 3 charities, and during the author's luncheon, we are going to have some form of donations to be given to support our charities, because we'd like to write them a check at the end of the year, as we do every year. So we will come up with an idea, and you will hear from us very soon. So the nominating committee, Dot Graziano is in charge of the nominating committee. She's going to come up. And then she's just going to announce the slate, and then we're going to take nominations from the floor and from the people at home. And then at the end, Dot's going to come up again, and we will vote on them and announce the board for next year. So Dot, you want to just come up here for, is that okay, Dot? You okay coming up? Okay. Okay. Your 8th year, remember?
8th year. This is it. After 8 years, this is my last report. For the nominating committee, as per our constitution, the nominating committee included me as chairman and past president, a member of the board, Robin Pavia, and a member from the general membership, Susan Ganjami is back there. The following is the slate of proposed officers for the executive board of book club for 21 through 23. Most of them here, should I have them stand?
Are they here?
Yeah, okay. President, Robin Pavia. Vice President, Sarah Drogan. I think I saw Sarah, there she is. Secretary, Stephanie Tamalevich. Treasurer and membership chairman, Kathy Taberski. Kathy just took on one more job. She doesn't mind. Communications, Carol Henry. Again, well, we need her. And charities, Eileen Leiden is here. Jean Fletcher is not feeling well, so she's not here. And I don't know if Suzanne Flynn, I didn't see her. Suzanne Flynn.
Oh, I don't see her.
Okay. And Mary Cronin will serve as the advisor to the board. All of you should have received an email with this slate and the opportunity to nominate someone else. Nominate, because everybody wants to do these jobs. Nominations, if any, will be taken from the floor a little later, as Mary said, and we'd like to give those members who are watching online the opportunity to nominate someone if they would like to do so. That, again, is in our Constitution. If you would like to nominate somebody and you're watching online, you can text Ben during this meeting, and Mary will call for a vote, or I will, later in the meeting. I want to thank the members of the committee for their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dot. So now we're on to our next big event, which is the book sale, which is a week from today. And it's going to be, as everybody knows, in people's garages along Winding Oaks Way. And I just want to say before we get going that the club has been absolutely wonderful supporting us in this event. They're providing the tables and the chairs and the sanitizer and lots and lots of help delivering all the books that are in the Live Oak room over to the 3 different garages. So it's just wonderful that they're doing this for us. I think Joan Voger's here, and she'd like to just give a little talk about the book upcoming sale Friday.
Okay. Hi. And as Mary said, the books stroll sale is next Friday from 9 to 2. And please deliver any books that we can use in the sale to the Oak Room, which is right over there, starting today and through Thursday next week at noon. Then we'll be taking them to the houses. And please do not bring recipe books, any foreign language books, or books that you maybe kind of were questioning, will they sell or not? Okay, all right. And then we want you to know that we've changed the format to garages because safety is our #1 concern for this sale. And we will be requiring masks at all the locations. And if you forget, we will have a mask there for you. We're asking that you wear gloves. And if you don't have gloves, don't worry, we will have gloves at each of the locations. And then we will have someone on the book club sale committee that will be reminding you of social distancing and making sure that that is followed. So safety is our #1 requirement and our goal. So please come and enjoy the book club sale. And then thanks to all of you that have volunteered, and I have the schedule on the screen here. And thank you to B. Busa and Judy Guide. Did I get that name right? Joyce Guide, okay? Because we have filled in the last 2 blanks. So we've got all the volunteers for the sale filled. Thank you. And then, so if you want to check your name out here to see which garage you're going to go to and at what time, it's here. And I will be sending out an email to remind you also. Then could you go on to the next screen? Okay, the next screen is for people who signed up to volunteer to set up on Thursday, and that'll be starting from 1 to 5. So if you look for your name there for the time and what garage you'll be working at, and I will also be sending out emails reminding you of that. Okay, and then Mary reminded you that this book club stroll is to raise money for our donations to the Literacy Council, the Grace Place, and Naples Park Elementary. And as she said, if you aren't able to come to the book stroll, and if you would like to make a donation, we will welcome that. You could write out a check to Stonebridge Book Club to Kathy Tyberski. And I'd also like to reiterate what Mary said. The staff of Stonebridge is always, I mean, they've come through again. They've really been great, and they'll continue to be great, helping us, with all the details. And really thank you for that. Okay. And then also to Kathy Burke for getting all the cardboard boxes that we're storing our books in. So, okay, this has been a great team effort, and looking forward to seeing all of you on Thursday and Friday.
Thank you, Joan, and a big thank you to Kathy Rushak, who's not here today. They've done a tremendous job and lots of time and work. And somebody picked up the rest of my, you have it, Joan, by any chance? I'm almost done, girls. So again, we are going to be very safety conscious next Friday. Where am I here now? We've done the nominating committee. Okay, book straw. Okay, next thing is the author's luncheon. The author, of course, it'll be virtual and it'll be here in the dining room. And the author's name is Hank Felipe Ryan. She's a mystery writer out of the Boston area. And I was just telling somebody I got her name from the author that was here last year. Again, we had close to 200 people in the dining room, and now we can have 50. So, but she gave me her name, and she has done many events with her and said she's just a wonderful speaker. So she was an investigative reporter for a Boston paper, and then she became a writer, and she's won many mystery awards. So she should be very, very good. And then we are going to have a lunch on the veranda again for 50 people after her speech. And you'll just be charged to your account, the lunch. You'll have a choice of 2 things, and the club is going to take reservations at some point before the event. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that or not, but so it's a month from today, girls. It's March 12th. So it'll be our next big event, and we will have, again, some form of making a donation to book club. And now I think we should get on with our speaker. So Robin's going to introduce Barbara to you.
Good morning, everyone. Today, Barbara Elliot is presenting for us. Barbara was born in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, a small town southeast of Cleveland. She met her husband, Bob, in college, where they both had parts in the play Pride and Prejudice. They married in college and spent much of their marriage moving, including to upstate New York, Chicago, London, Switzerland. I said, oh boy. And in between these moves, Cleveland kept pulling them back, and they now have a home in Chagrin Falls and have become part of the Stonebridge community 3 years ago. Barb and Bob have 3 sons. The eldest lives in Dallas with his wife and their daughter. The youngest resides in Chicago with his wife and 1-year-old daughter. And their middle son lives in Colorado Springs with his wife and 3 children. Barbara worked at Gilmore Academy in Gates Mills, Ohio, where she taught American and British literature, as well as 2 Kenyon college courses, literature and film and crossing borders. She worked with students as an advisor for the literary magazine. She was also a college guidance counselor at the academy. While living in Switzerland, she taught creative writing to middle school students. When she is not walking her 2 basset hounds, Tammy and Hubert, she loves to read, golf, and participate in Bible studies and play bridge. So Barbara is taking us today into a new medium, the graphic novel, with The Best We Could Do. Thank you.
Grab one. Thank you. Okay, Mary, I'm gonna hand you back here. Well, good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here. I'm very honored. And when Robin called last summer, I felt very honored. So thank you so much. And thank you to the board. I think you've done an amazing job in the midst of this COVID season. All the challenges we've had, but we all love books, and it's something that we can look forward to gather together in person and virtually to listen and share and discuss. So I think this is absolutely terrific. It's great to see people in person. And it's also wonderful, well, I think the technology aspect is fantastic. I feel a little bit, I'm going to date myself, like Miss Barbara from Romper Room. So I see Susan and Teddy and Mary and Bobby
out there. So hello to you who are joining us virtually. I'm glad we can do that. So I am also excited that I am presenting to you when I am, because I found myself fascinated in November when Tony Pavia presented An American Town and the Vietnam War. And then last month when Kathy presented Lizette's List, because we have the Vietnam War and we have art. And here we are melding the two together. So I think that was a wonderful segue for me to begin my presentation to you. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to give you a little outline. I'm going to start by presenting our author, give you a review of her work, and then I'm going to give a defense of the graphic form. I'm guessing that some people might have been slightly put off with the idea of reading a comic book. So I'm going to just do a little defense on that. And we're going to do a very brief overview of the Vietnam War, and then we'll discuss our book. So if we can go to the next slide, our author, and I'm going to pronounce her name, is T, and the last name, it's like Life Boy, and I'll probably go back and forth. I'll do the best I can to pronounce it properly. But T Boy was born in Vietnam. She came to the United States in 1978 as part of the Boat People wave of refugees fleeing Southeast Asia at the end of the Vietnam War. Her debut graphic memoir, The Best We Could Do, which is published by Abrams Comic Arts and was published in 2017, has been selected for an American Book Award, a Common Book for UCLA and other colleges and universities, an All-City Read by Seattle and San Francisco Public Libraries, a National Book Critics Circle finalist in autobiography, and an Eisner Award finalist in reality-based comics. It made over 30 best of 2017 book lists, including Bill Gates' top 5 picks. She is currently researching and drawing a work of graphic nonfiction about immigrant detention and deportation to be published by One World Random House. Ms. Bui has her BA in Legal Studies and the Practice of Art from UC Berkeley, her MFA in Sculpture from Bard College, and her MA in Art Education from NYU. She is currently writing and is an adjunct professor at California College of the Arts with a focus on MFA comics. She says, the book began with a grad school project. Quote, I was a graduate student at NYU, deconstructing all of the bad representations of Vietnamese people in the Vietnam War in movies and pop culture and American scholarship. So it was a very academic grumpiness that I had at the beginning. We wanted to do more with that research, to make it accessible to a wider audience. And she says graphic memoirs like Art Spiegelman's Mouse about the Holocaust and Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis about growing up during the Iran Islamic Revolution inspired her. Quote, I really wanted to do what they did, weave the personal and political and the historical to tell a story of the Vietnam War and all the things that caused it in a way that I felt I had never seen before. So we interviewed the closest sources she had, her parents. She says telling them she was writing a book about their lives helped break the ice. It's really hard to sit down your parents and say, tell me all about your painful history. But if you tell them, I'm working on a book for a school project, then they'll oblige. The book delves as much into her family history as it does Vietnam's traumatic past. Her parents had seen what they'd seen, and as children and young adults in the years before and during the Vietnam War. I'd heard a lot of the stories growing up, and the stories were pretty heavy, and I would often hear them at times when I wasn't ready. So I had this kind of heaviness that I grew up with, and I wanted to make sense of the stories. According to Abraham Reisman in his 2017 review from the Vulture, quote, "The vague outline of the Bui clan saga is familiar for any immigrant story. Family starts out in one place, has a hard journey to get to another, struggles to settle, and eventually finds some kind of emotional synthesis. However, Bui presents that saga in a way that is narratively intricate, intellectually fastidious, and visually stunning." He goes on to say, "The artwork possesses a deceptive simplicity that is particular to the comics medium. It's an artistic tradition that rewards directness of both word and image. And Bui, despite being a school teacher with no published comic books prior to this one, dances within that tradition better than most. Her humans have sparse faces, often just eyebrows, dot eyes, 2 lines for a nose, and a few mouth strokes. That minimalism packs an emotional wallet. Since Bui has given the reader a prime example of what theorist Scott McCloud calls masking. That is, faces so basic that they cut past our defenses and make us empathize more than we would with more detail. She draws on a range of visual traditions too, from the figure drawing of Alison Bechtel to the landscapes of Vietnamese silk scrolls." So I wanted to tell you that my first experience with the graphic form was when I was teaching, and our chair of our department decided that we should teach Persepolis, which is one of the books that Ms. Bui said inspired her. And I was never much of a comic book person as a kid. I found them unsatisfying. My friends read Archie, but there wasn't enough to the story. It wasn't deep enough for me. I read some funnies, Dondi I particularly liked, and Blondie. And of course, when my kids were little, they were thrilled with Calvin and Hobbes because that author was in the grade ahead of me and from Chagrin Falls, Ohio. So Calvin and Hobbes is set in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, if you didn't know. But when we were charged to teach this, I was prepared for some pushback from parents, which we did get some. But they soon were converts. This book, again, like Bui, it's sparse, all in black and white. And what a coming of age story for this young woman during the Iran Revolution. If you're interested in this form, I would highly recommend Persepolis. The students' eyes were open, they were engaged, and it was a wonderful experience. I also wanted to tell you that the term we use, illustrated, graphic, and comic, are all interchangeable. I think people use them interchangeably. I find it hard to think of what we read or Persepolis as a comic. There's not a lot of funniness involved, maybe occasional bits of humor, but so she has called it an illustrated memoir. So it is not, it's a form, it's not a genre. Genres are biography, historical fiction. This is a memoir, that's the genre, but the form is an illustrated one. So I just wanted to clarify that. So if we go to the next slide, I am going to give a short defense of the graphic form. For those of you who might feel like it's too modern or, you know, it's not really literature, I thought I would give a brief defense because I, like you, was somewhat put off at first. So I ran across an essay in the Wall Street Journal in October titled, "The Power of Telling Stories in Pictures." The essayist, Amanda Foreman, begins with, "Good grief, it's Snoopy's 70th birthday." Well, all well and good that we have comic strips to amuse us and sometimes to have powerfully moved us, but I wanted to step back in history to consider this form of storytelling that has been around for 1,000 years. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the earliest example of this. Earliest example of words and pictures. I think this is at the Louvre now. It tells an individual story and is credited to the Sumerians around 2450 BC. It's called The Stele of the Vultures. which depicts King Anatum of Lagash's crushing victor over the kingdom of Umma. According to Ms. Foreman, the form known as narrative sequential art spread across the ancient world, reaching the apogee under the Roman Emperor Trajan. This form developed in Asia as well as pre-Columbian America. In the next slide, I'll bet some of you have actually seen this in person. We see that royal and religious purposes were also served by the Bayeux tapestry, made in the 11th century, which depicts the events leading up to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Its original audience would have understood its more than 70 scenes as a drawn-out morality tale about the consequences of sin. England was invaded because King Harold broke his oath of loyalty to the Normans. Have any of you seen this in France? Yes, it's amazing. Okay, our next slide shows us in 1836, the publication of Charles Dickens' The Pickwick Papers in an illustrated serialized format revolutionized the publication of new fiction. The popularity of the original illustrations in Dickens' novels was unprecedented and helped to popularize the use of illustrations in serious fiction. Published in 19 issues over 20 months, the success of the Pickwick Papers popularized serialized fiction and cliffhanger endings. So even though what we're seeing today feels modern, storytelling, we're all meaning makers, storytellers. This has been around for quite a while. I'd like to move next to our next slide and give you just a brief flyover of Vietnam's history. And we can see in this beautiful picture how lovely it is geographically. We all have our past experiences and bring our own stories to the Vietnam War. I'm sure all of us in this room have husbands, fathers, brothers, cousins, aunts who were in some way involved in the Vietnam War. And I know there are history teachers in the audience who know way more than I do. So I'm just going to give you a brief look at the history of it so we can put our story into context. If you are fascinated with the story of Vietnam, I would highly recommend the Ken Burns documentary, which is a PBS documentary. He does a marvelous job with that. Before we begin, I just wanted to let you know, Vietnam is now a unified, no North and South, unified communist country, and it has a highly controlled media. And I actually think we maybe are on friendlier terms with it now. It has been a tourist destination for the last decade. So what a change. So I want to take us to our next slide. And this is in your book. And I found this to be fascinating and helpful. I was speaking to a friend the other day and she said she didn't like it. It was a little confusing to her. But I remember sitting in history class having had to have read a chapter of history and the words all just kind of blended together, or I lost track of ideas. And the way that she has this with the pictures here and almost like a timeline, I found to be very helpful. So I'm going to leave this up as I go through my brief history with you. So Vietnam is a country with a rich history, with empires including the kingdoms of Funan and Champa in the 1st and 2nd centuries. The Lai dynasty achieved independence from China in 1010 and expanded further south into the Mekong Delta in the 18th century. Now she really deals with when the French took over until 1975. You'll see that mostly on her timeline. And in 1859, the French conquered Saigon, and in 1862, the emperor surrendered South Vietnam to the French. In 1883, France forced the rest of Vietnam to accept the status of a French protectorate. There was a war against France after, on September 2nd, 1945, Ho Chi Minh publicly declared Vietnam independent. Soon after his declaration of independence, he decided to negotiate with France as he was having to contend with Chinese aggression. In 1954, on July 20th in Geneva, negotiators from the Viet Minh and France agreed on the division of Vietnam into two states, a communist North Vietnam and a capitalist South Vietnam. We then deal with the war against America. Between 1959 and 1963, the communist government of North Vietnam escalated military confrontation against the South Vietnam government. More than 40,000 North Vietnamese guerrillas infiltrated the South and provided the South Vietnamese communists with arms and ammunition using the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This passed through Laotian and Cambodian territory. In 1961, you'll see President Kennedy up there, newly elected, worried about the spread of communism and sent the first 100 military advisors and a special unit of 400 soldiers to Vietnam. In the following year, the US increased the presence of their troops in Vietnam to 11,000 soldiers. On August 1964, on August 2nd, 2 American cruisers were fired at by North Vietnamese patrol boats in the Bay of Tonkin. The US insisted that the cruisers had been in international waters and used the incident as an excuse to bomb targets in North Vietnam for the first time. In the March of '72, saw a communist spring offensive by conventional North Vietnamese troops crossing the demarcation line to invade South Vietnam. Intensive bombardments by American fighter planes forced the North Vietnamese troops to retreat. Then in '73 in January, a ceasefire agreement was signed in Paris and became effective that day. In March of '73, the last American troops left Vietnam. After the fall of Saigon and the unification, initially for fear of political persecution and later because of the difficult economic situation in Vietnam, large numbers of so-called boat people fled the country. In 1979 alone, more than 270,000 boat people flee from Vietnam. I wanted to talk briefly about the Tet Offensive. I know we've all heard that term and how critical it was to the war. It was a coordinated series of North Vietnamese attacks. It was a surprise attack on more than 100 cities and outposts in South Vietnam, pre-dawn. The offensive was an attempt to foment rebellion among the South Vietnamese population and encourage the United States to scale back its involvement in the war. It was a major turning point in the war. It shocked the American public into reality about the escalating conflict and led to President Johnson's decision not to seek re-election. Well, what is Tet? What does that mean? It's the most important celebration in Vietnamese culture. The word is shortened for Tet Nguyen Dan, which means feast of the first morning of the first day. Tet celebrates the arrival of spring based on the Vietnamese calendar, which usually has the date falling in January or February in the Gregorian calendar. Tet is also an occasion for pilgrims and family reunions. They start forgetting about the troubles of the past year and hope for a better upcoming year. Are we kind of feeling like that? They consider Tet to be the first day of spring. So you can imagine with all these people celebrating and then this horrible bombardment happens. I think we can go to our next slide. Okay, so yes, we're going to begin our story here. Okay, so storytelling. All stories are told from a point of view. Okay, so it's true with this work. This is a memoir, and it's written in the first person, which gives ownership to the story. Tea's experience gives authority and credibility to the story. She knows the subject matter. What is unique is that she has captured a moment with an image, and that image amplifies what she is trying to say. It is often said that the author's voice is a window to the soul. This is true of the best we could do. Tea's vulnerability allows the reader intimacy with her. The initiation of this story evokes a relationship with us as the reader and also with her family. We find that we're going to have a big payoff scene at the end. So I do have images I'm going to show you. I'm going to hold off until I get to chapter 3. I was afraid that the first chapter images might be too disturbing for some people. They were really graphic. Her first chapter is titled Labor, and it's an apt title because she is in labor. The setting is the New York Methodist Hospital in November 2005. T begins the story with the birth of her child. And it is a tough, very tough labor. We see that her mother is there, and we see the relationship we have with her mother. We learn some basics about her mother and father's relationship, that they'd been together for 28 years, but were now separated. This is certainly not an idealized or glossed over account of birth. The difficult labor and delivery, and then the difficulty nursing her baby. And I wonder for you, as it did for me, if it brought back any memories of your own childbirth experience. It certainly did for me. The next chapter we come to is titled Rewind, Reverse. And I meant to say, I love that she has each chapter titled. It gives us a hint, and often there's a cleverness about it. And I found that to be true of this next chapter, Rewind, Reverse. So it takes us 10 years forward to 2015 in Berkeley, California, where T quickly takes us back, first to 1999, then 1987. She here in this chapter establishes the challenges of her own and her siblings' difficult home life. We learn that there was disapproval of boyfriends and a lot of secrecy that was going on. T's sister ran away from home, which caused her mother to take a whole bottle of pills. She survived, but the family was broken. It is finally in 2015 that T recognizes that she is still very angry and she has to face the past. I want to stop here and say, every good book begins with a promise to the reader. In a mystery book, we're promised that the mystery will be solved. In a romance, we know that there's going to be a fulfilled romance. In a coming of age novel, we're going to see somebody battle trials and come of age successfully. Well, so too in this book, T makes a promise to us. Here, she is promising to figure out how to overcome the anger and disappointment with herself and her family. We will see at the end if she fulfills her promise to herself and to us. If we go to the next slide, we can see that T and her husband, Travis, moved to California to be closer to the family. She and Travis were very happy in New York. Life was good. But she felt it would be important to spend more time with her family. But I think what's most powerful in this image is the bottom panel where she says, proximity and closeness are not the same thing. And isn't that true? I've been sitting in a room with a relative probably more than 6 feet apart now. And there's a giant chasm there. So just because we're close close in distance doesn't mean that we're close. And so she has expectations and she has guilt because she feels that this move has not really achieved yet what she had hoped for. She presses her family for stories. And if we look at the next slide, we can see that she says she keeps looking toward the past. I thought that was profound, the idea that you have to look toward something to resolve something in the past. And what I wanted for us to take note of in this page is the shadows. You can see the shadow in the bottom right panel. And shadows are a motif in this book. We'll see shadows numerous times and how they play out, but I wanted to point out that one in particular. So we begin to learn about her family and their pasts. T's mother shares her own birth stories. But before we delve into this, I'll give you the names of the family because I know that can be very confusing. We jumped around in the story and the names are a little bit different than the names that we are used to. So I just wanted to run through that to help clarify things. T, of course, is our narrator. Her mother's given name was Hang, but T calls her Ma, which is not how I'm going to refer to her in the rest of this presentation. Her father's name is Nam Bui, and we will refer to him as Bo, as T does. Hui Yen was their first child, a daughter, whose name means Great River. She was sickly from the start. And if we go to the next slide, we find out that she died in infancy. And they weren't really sure how, whether it was tainted formula. She was badgered not to nurse the baby by her mother-in-law. But it was devastating for her. And there we have, I'm sorry, we did the best we could do. There it is, the title of the book, Set in Grief and Guilt. I don't know how you ever get over the loss of a child. Okay, moving on. They next had a daughter, Lan. She was born in 1966. And then following that, they had a daughter named Bic. And Bic repeatedly tells everyone, it's pronounced Bic. It's spelled B-I-C-H. So you can imagine what some of her classmates might have called her. So she was born in 1968. Thao, another daughter, was stillborn. And Bo buries that baby before Ma ever got to see her. T was born in 1975, and she calls herself the replacement child. And finally, Tam, a son, was born in 1978 in Malaysia after their escape from Vietnam. So we move back in chapter 3 to Home, the Holding Pen. And in 2015, we learned that T's parents have been separated for 9 years, but she goes back to her childhood. And the holding pen refers to how their home has become a holding pen for the frustrations that they all have. They include discrimination, looking for work, even though they were highly educated to the parents, and fear by the children. Ma found work putting together circuit boards, and Bo stayed home with the kids. He smoked a lot, was easily angered and superstitious. If we go to the next slide, we can see what I think is a very powerful image. T tells us she did not feel safe at home. Her father was always fearful, and here we have an image of Bo sleeping on the top of the page, and a menacing swirl, and a young boy in the middle trying to find his way. And T says her father practiced leaving his body when he slept at night, and she practiced feeling brave. The next chapter takes us to Blood and Rice, and now we get to learn about Bo's childhood. Up until now, we're not very fond of Bo. He does not seem like a great person to be minding the children or holding down the fort, but now we're going to learn a little bit about his past. We learned that his grandfather and great uncle were involved in real estate in '51 in an important sea town, and that his grandfather was a smooth talker who lacked any moral compass. In fact, his grandfather was adulterous and coerced his son into stealing opium from his wife so they had money to run away. Did that, and they relocated to the north. Bo's childhood then was marked by illness and disruption. His father was abusive and threw out his wife, so Bo never got to see his mother again. There was famine and there was death everywhere. His father joined the Viet Minh, and Bo was sent to his grandmother's, where he escaped starvation. In the next slide, we see his next interaction with his father. And this is really tough. Bo is being kicked in the stomach and then by his father, and then his father leaves to fight in the revolution. I think the right-hand side is so powerful because we see this little boy who's clearly been abused and disappointed, and he's saying, "You are not my papa." And then she inserts that it's 1945 and the fall of Japan occurs. So we have a little boy simmering with anger and rage and disappointment, and then we have that image of the atomic bomb being dropped, which I thought was quite powerful. After this point, there was a power vacuum in Indochina. Ho Chi Minh proclaimed the Free Republic of Vietnam, but the French returned. The Viet Minh fought a guerrilla resistance, and Beau's village becomes a target. In the next slide, we can see that in his village, he had to hide in the dirt and water. And he says, above ground, the soldiers burned houses, killed women and children, while underground Beau waited. And we know that more than a day has passed. In those panels, we see that when the daylight comes. But fortunately, there are survivors, and he is brought out of that. So the survivors leave for the safety of French control Haiphong. In the next slide, we can see that at that point, Beau is 7 years old. When we think of everything that Beau had gone through up until his 7th year, it's really quite devastating. It's at this point that T begins to understand her father's terror. She says, afraid of my father, craving safety and comfort, I had no idea that the terror I felt was only a long shadow of his own. And there we have that shadow motif again in that right panel, as you can see. I found this page fascinating, where we see T as a little girl right next to her father, Beau as a little boy, and then there she is as a little girl still, and her father. So we are beginning to, she is beginning to understand things a little bit better. The next chapter, titled Either Or, we learn about T's beautiful mother, who she idolized as a child and then judged as a young adult. I think maybe we all do that with our moms. Ma was born in Cambodia in 1943. She grew up with privilege, but trouble came. The Vietnamese were being killed there, and the family returned to Vietnam. If we go to the next slide, we know that she was always an excellent student. She stayed in French schools her entire education. She was very good-hearted, and in fact taught some of the servants how to read. Her mother was cruel to the servants, cruel to the children, and we even see T trying to climb into her mother's, trying to climb in her mother's lap and being pushed away. So even though she and Beau had very different backgrounds, Beau was poor, we see that they're both damaged. They had kind of poor interactions with their parents, and that gives us great insight into who they are. We learn that Ma was extremely focused on her education, and she tells T she wanted to teach and not marry, but then she met Beau. We continue then to learn more about Beau. We learn that he also attended French schools, and it's there that he became quite nationalistic and communistic. And then he visits his father in the communist North and sees that the utopia he had dreamed of didn't exist. In the next slide, we can see that T is inserted into his past when she asks, well, what are land reforms? And he tells her this was what's happening in the northerly communist region. Notice that the panels with T and Beau are light, and the panels with the land reform atrocities are dark. Beau tells T, in a short time, the land reform killed 220,000 people. Beau and his grandfather then leave for South Vietnam. He has figured out that communism maybe is not the way to go in the way that it was being played out in the North. The next chapter is titled The Chessboard, and one reviewer felt that this would have been a much better title for the book, as he felt that the Vietnamese were all pawns in this game of the Vietnam War. But at the beginning of this chapter, Bo and his grandfather found that life was pretty good in Saigon in 1955. They bought a house, and if we go to the next slide, Bo tells T that's where she lived as a little girl, but she doesn't have any memories of it. She does go visit there with her husband and her brother in 2001, and I was particularly drawn to these images because I think earlier I told you that she allows intimacy with her readers, and I think she does this here because she's showing everyday life. She's got her brother stamping all the pictures, and she even says that she has a haircut that she regretted. So she leaves the story for a little bit to make that commentary. But here she's delving deeply into the past and is able to go to Vietnam. It is interesting to note that Bo refused to go with them. He would not go back. T returns then to Bo's story, where we learn that he continued his education in South Vietnam as the French consulate gave him a scholarship. He became so sick with TB, though, that he failed his final exams. His grandmother had TB and did not want to take the medication. He gets TB, fails the exam, but fortunately, he later passed the Vietnamese equivalency test. He then went to Teachers College and met Ma in 1962. Ma, as a young girl, had always dreamed of being a doctor, but her health didn't allow it. So she decided she wanted to go abroad and do something meaningful. And so she's studying at the Teachers College, and she says that's the happiest time of her life before she met Bo and had a family. This was kind of tough for T to take, but it was, again, insightful. Well, Ma and Bo are going to get married, and Ma's family is very against it. Ma is pregnant. They feel that Bo is beneath them, but Ma has a strategy. She feels like, we'll get married. I don't think he's going to live very long because he's had TB and he's sickly. Well, Bo survives. He does. She lives. But as we know from our earlier understanding of the family, they lost the baby. So they begin their life again in Ha Tien. They're teachers, they're happy. And then it's 1965 and the American troops arrive by tens of thousands. The Tet Offensive occurred in 1968 while visiting Bo's parents in Saigon. If we go to the next slide, we can see the contradiction of who is good and who is bad was confusing for T. It was not as overly simplified as the stereotypes in the American version. And I want to read along with you here on these 2 pages, because I think for all of us, this war was terribly confusing. And here's someone whose family has lived through it, and it's confusing for her. So we'll begin it with the top left, where he says, treating their own people like criminals. No wonder people hated them. And Ma says, aren't you being too extreme? They were just trying to protect their city. And T is thinking, was this the same general in that famous Saigon execution photo? Bo clarifies, the one where he shoots a Viet Cong prisoner? Yes. You know, the American media broadcasts that all over the world and made South Vietnam look bad. But no one talks about how that same Viet Cong, just hours before, had murdered an entire family in their home. He is thinking, but you didn't like that general either. No. Wait, does he hate the general or is he defending him? Did he like communism or not? The contradictions in my father's story troubled me for a long time, but so did the oversimplifications and stereotypes in American versions of the Vietnam War. There we see the GIs, good guys, then the bad guys, the Viet Cong, Communist Front in the South, very hard to see, and the South Vietnamese, bar girls and hookers, corrupt leaders, Papa San, kids looking for handouts, small, effete men standing next to tall American man. And I just want to take us briefly to the next slide, which is that famous photo that I'm sure we all remember. So T was born 3 months before South Vietnam loses the war. So let's go to our next slide. and which is the chapter Heroes and Losers. So on April 30th, 1975, South Vietnam surrendered and the communists took over. Bo and Ma couldn't run with a 3-month-old baby, and we see in the next slide that the fall of Saigon was actually quite quiet, and T feels that she survived because of that. Soon after that, people lived in fear of arrests. People began disappearing, so Bo arranged for an escape, but it was canceled. There are neighbors spying on each other, books being burned, children being indoctrinated in school. Bo lost his job and was assigned to forced labor. He became depressed. They started selling their possessions. Ma becomes pregnant, and there are forced abortions. She arrived for her abortion, and the doctor took pity on her and did not perform it. They finally found a place on a boat. The places were bought with a gold bar. They made their escape. On the boat, there was sickness, tight quarters, and the pilot was unable to carry on. So Bo takes over piloting the boat, despite the fact that he has never done so before. He navigated difficult waters, avoided patrol ships, and had to find the right route to safety and avoided pirates. His pregnant wife was below deck, tending to the sick. Bo is clearly the hero in this chapter. They finally made it to Malaysia and to a refugee camp. When they arrived, Ma had to go to the hospital briefly. She didn't give birth there. And she returns to the camp. And in the next slide, we learn that order returns to the family, and they are identified as boat people. And I do like that she inserts something more than drawings here. We can see what they look like as a family. And then she has drawn faces of some other people who were boat people. There were 3,000 refugees in the camp. And in the next slide, we can see that many people reinvented themselves. They changed their ages. Maybe if they were a little older, you know, they'd get a job, or I mean, younger, they would get a job. Older, they could retire early. They married each other. They adopted children. So it was a time of change. And baby Tam is born there in the camp. They stayed a few months, and then they decide to go to the United States. There were many countries that were on offer, but Ma had a sister who sponsored them, so they're going to the US. The Red Cross purchased their tickets. They were immunized and examined, but Bo wasn't able to make that departure with them because of the scarring on his lungs from TB. They were optimistic that he would join them later. The next slide, I really could relate to. Ma gets to the airport with these children, and because she speaks different languages, she's employed as an interpreter, and she's helping all these refugees and the organizers. They get to LA, and she's a big airport, a different country, and she's still helping people find where they need to go, and they almost missed their flight. Oh, and I had to travel overseas with 3 little boys. And I could relate to that feeling, and I am in awe of what she did. So they make it to Chicago, and Bo is finally cleared, and he joins them. They begin to adjust, but life is not easy there. They're with their relatives. Kids are made fun of for being boat people, but they begin to adjust. Both Bo and Ma take classes, and the children start school. But there was a lot of sickness. Remember, they were in Chicago. Did you know Chicago had a polar vortex a couple of days ago? Here they're coming from the Vietnam, which is more closer to the equator than we are here, and their first experience with this cold and wet. So they're at the doctors a lot. The kids are sick, and they decide, we're moving to California. So they do. They move to California. They find an apartment. They are on welfare very briefly, just a few months, until Ma found a job which supported them. On the next slide, we learn that they learned important lessons: how to behave, and most importantly, to have your important papers together. The children all did well in school. Lon and Bick were valedictorians and salutatorian respectively, but they had PTSD responses. In the next slide, we'll see that T remembers when an alarm went off in the apartment unit below them. The older couple were on oxygen, their tanks exploded, and the family just grabs their papers and runs out of the house. And she says, this, not any particular piece of Vietnamese culture, is my inheritance. The inexplicable need and extraordinary ability to run when the shit hits the fan. And she calls this the refugee reflex. So in our final chapter, we circle back to the beginning of the memoir. T is a new mom. Her baby was jaundiced and had to stay in the hospital. If we go to the next slide, we see that she says this is the hardest time in her life. And these images show us that she's really relating to her father. Her little baby's jaundiced and has to stay in the hospital. She and her husband rent a hotel room, and she has to go over there every hour and a half to nurse the baby, and she's tired, she's exhausted, but she wants to keep him alive. And there we see Bo piloting the boat with his pregnant wife below. He is the hero. Keep him alive, get him to safety. In the next slide, we can see that she's grown into motherhood. She's pondered who she is as a person, and she's come to terms with her past. And we can see the intricate connection with her family and the past that she has here. And she says she'd always feel the weight of the past. She sees her life as a gift. She can now move on with her life. And in the next slide, she has hope for her son's future. So I think we just need to remember the promise she made to us as a writer in the beginning. And she's made good on that. She's fulfilled it. She's reconciled her past and resolved it, and she can now move forward. So this memoir forced me to look at the refugee experience through an honest and clear lens. I think we all bring our own understanding, but this clarified things for me for what they went through. And I applaud T for pursuing her parents' stories to resolve her own demons, as difficult as that was. The theme of her refugee experience, family dynamics, and survival made this memorable and powerful story for me. I thought her drawings were compelling, and the images lingered in my mind long after I turned the last page. So that's what I have for you, and I look forward to your comments regarding how this impacted you as a reader, and I'm also interested in hearing how you approached the process of digesting the word and image. I thank you so much for your time. If anybody has anything.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? We only have one camera, so you will not be seen on the screen at home, but you certainly can come up to the microphone here. Marilyn?
Oh, thank you. Okay. It's a little clearer. Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Sorry.
When I was still in my working life, I was in pediatric practice in Connecticut.
They want you to come up so they can hear you. Sorry, I know. I don't think we can move. We can't move it then, right? No, can't move the mics. No.
Well, you can move that mic.
Oh, we can move this mic?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
But we'll still need to repeat the questions for the folks
Yes.
watching
Okay.
at home.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Want me just to go ahead?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. In my working life, is this working?
Should be.
Okay. In my working
No.
life.
Oh, hold on, audience at home. We're going to repeat the question in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. In my working life, I was a pediatric nurse practitioner, And in the family practice group I was in, a colleague of mine felt strongly about the Vietnamese refugees, for whatever reason. But she decided to bring them over and be a sponsor for them. And so it was really interesting for me to see these people who, whatever they've been living through in Vietnam, which wasn't wonderful, they come to the States and maybe one person in their group speaks English, nobody else does. And, you know, they end up in refugee housing and so on. And I mean, they were hard workers and they really went to school, you know, did private stuff. But the picture of how hard that was, you think, oh, we just emigrate to the United States. But you don't speak the language, you don't share the customs, and it was pretty amazing. They adapted, they adjusted, and it was a success story.
So, I don't know you, I'm sorry. I just want to give your name.
Oh, Mary Beth Felice.
Mary Beth Felice has shared an experience where a coworker was a sponsor for Vietnamese refugees and how she was able to see just how difficult it was for them to adapt to life here in the United States, language challenges, but how hard they worked and how struck she was by that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Robin. You can move that. Yes. Just turn it around all the way.
Mine is just a reflection.
Yeah.
When I was reading this book, two individuals that I crossed in my life came back to me. When I was in my 30s, raising my children, I was friends with a woman who also had children the same age, and her parents were Holocaust survivors, and she had a very depressive, it was just like a malaise about her. And then about 10 years later, when I was working, I worked with a psychologist who was from Poland, and she also, her parents were in the camps at Auschwitz, and she was actually born right after the American liberation, and she was in an American camp right in Europe. And she had the exact same personality that was shaped by such tragedy. And when I read this, I couldn't help but thinking of those two women that I passed in my life.
Yeah, that's powerful. Robin was relating how two people she had known were children of Holocaust survivors and how deeply wounded and affected they both were in similar ways. So this refugee experience, and we know that, but when we see it or read about it, it brings it home more clearly how difficult it is.
Move it any way you want, Sarah.
First of all, thank you for expanding our horizons. I have 3 granddaughters who love graphic novels, so it's wonderful to have the opportunity to read an adult graphic novel. I'm reminded that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and especially the last section of the book that you showed some pictures from, maybe 206 to 211. The war from our perspective, the shooting of the Viet Cong by the general and the evacuation of Saigon, her renditions of those brought tears to my eyes. And thank you for the idea of a promise at the beginning that is fulfilled at the end. I found her ruminations on motherhood at the end, again, brought tears to my eyes when she said, "Why didn't I call my mother me? She wanted to be called me, but I called her Ma." It seems to me that thinking of yourself as a child is a pass for selfishness. And, you know, coming to terms with that in herself as adult, she is no longer the center of the world. And we shouldn't blame our parents for things that they did do or didn't do. I found that really
I'm not sure I can summarize that as beautifully, but look at pages 206 and through, what was it, 211? The images are worth pondering. Yeah, when my son gave me this for a Christmas gift a year ago, and my first, I mean, I always say that as I did the best I could do. You know, so at first I thought, oh no, is this going to be a guilt trip on me? But no, it was not. I would be interested, did anybody find it difficult as a book to read? Was it, you did? Okay, were the images distracting to you?
I don't know, I just had trouble getting into it, and I usually dive into a book.
Yeah,
I just found it real difficult,
okay.
and understanding it jumped around a lot of stuff.
Yes, it was, she covered a lot of ground. She covered a lot of ground. But yeah, I think for some people, reading the words, you create your own image in the mind. I know when I taught my literature and film course, people were adamant that the book is always better than the movie. But there are things you can do in a movie that you can't do in a book. There are things you can do with an image that you can't do with words. So there's an argument for both. But thanks for coming.
Oh, I really liked the presentation. It helped me, you know, understand the book better.
Good, I'm glad. Okay. We're all set. Thank you again so much for your time. Well, another wonderful presentation this year. We've had an outstanding year of presenters. Ben left us. I don't think anybody, oh, there he is. Anybody call in?
No.
Okay. Todd, do you want to just announce the slate and we'll take a vote and we can close the meeting or the. So next month is the office luncheon, girls. And I hope to see 50 of you here in our dining room. And I thank you all for coming, and I especially thank Barbara again. Want to take it from the room? Okay.
I promised it was my last one before. This one really is. The slate again that we have presented is Robin Pavia for president, Sarah Drogan for vice president, Stephanie Tamalevich for secretary, Kathy Taberski, treasurer and membership, Carol Henry, communications, and charities, Aline Leiden, Jean Fletcher, and Suzanne Flynn, and Mary Cronin as advisor to the board. Ben said we didn't have any other nominations.
No,
I guess we can ask this.
No.
Do we have any other nominations from the floor? I just want to say one more thing, and that is thank you to the new people who signed on to be on the board for the next 2 years. It took very little coaxing from me, and they were interested in getting involved, and I thank them for that.
Right. Can we have a vote on the slate that was presented by Dot? And everybody in approval, you can just raise your hand. The slate is passed. I thank you all. The girls just stand. Robin, everybody that's here that's on the slate. I've forgotten who's here and who's not here. Sorry. Robin's here. There you go. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. That's it for today, girls. Hope you enjoyed the session as I did. Thank you, Ben. You enjoy it?